This is your Daily 5 for Wednesday, May 6th, 2026. April sleaze is rapidly bleeding over into May because trying to get all the timing and publishing of these episodes correct is just a nightmare, but that's just where we are. So as part of April sleaze, the first commentary film we watched for this week is a 1971 Jess Franco film titled Vampyros Lesbos, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. And Franco, who I initially thought was a French director, I don't know why, but is actually Spanish, is a well-known exploitation filmmaker who's made a lot of different movies. So I went and tried to look at what many people consider the best of his filmography. I looked at several different lists and kind of compared and then did a little bit of sort of elimination on my end. And I came up with 3 movies that should be interesting. And honestly, yet again, because this apparently is my pattern, I led off with a movie that I expected very little from. And both of us, Lando and I both, came to the end of this movie impressed with how much there was in a film that I was next to positive was simply going to be a gratuitous display of naked women crawling all over each other and making out. And don't get me wrong, that is what it is, but it also, astonishingly, is telling a variation on the Bram Stoker Dracula story, the classic Dracula story. That doesn't feel like a throwaway, lazy attempt to just put window dressing plot points from the book into the movie, but instead, much like Dracula, although Dracula done far better, but similar to that movie, it feels like the changes are there's at least an attempt to justify them in that the main head female vampire is a lesbian. Partially because, and I say partially because I'm not saying this is the only element, we don't know that for sure, but part of the reason she has rejected men in general is because many men attempted to abuse her, and Dracula, in fact, abused her and used her, and so she has turned her back on the world of men and has decided that she would embrace only women. And again, is that a setup so that this is a movie with lots of nude women hugging each other and making out with each other and doing all kinds of things? Yes, it absolutely is. Jess Franco is not Shakespeare, but it also does work and has just enough to it that it isn't simply just another TNA flick that you dismiss, which often, once you get past the flesh element, which really isn't novel anymore in the age of the internet, they can often be very boring. And that's what I thought this might be. That's why I wanted to lead off with it and see if it was that. At least we could just run through it. But in fact, we were both impressed with what was in the movie. Now, the other side of it is, in terms of filmmaking, at least this movie, and I haven't seen, shockingly, a lot of Franco movies. I've only seen one which I reviewed before, which was the one where the vampire comes out of the grandfather clock, which I will never forget that image. I mean, that's just burned into my brain because it was so amazing. But his filmmaking style, I don't know what it's like all the time. We'll see with the next 2 movies. But in this film, the best description for it would be hippy-dippy loose, because there's a lot of just late 60s, early 70s trip-out music with sitars and a lot of droning going on, and the shots are just kind of wandering around and people are just putting their arms up and down and flailing, and it's just, oh boy, is it a product of its time. And yet, it's never boring for a number of reasons, but it never sits there and puts you to sleep. But you can tell that this was made in the very late 60s or very early 70s. I don't know exactly how long the filming on this was. It probably wasn't all that long, but it's 71. So you assume 1970. And boy, oh boy, does this feel rooted dead center of 1970. So if you don't like that type of, hey man, put on the doors and, tune out type of filmmaking, yeah, don't even bother. But like I said, the thing that really is the most surprising in a good way about the movie is it does tell a coherent story, which we can't say about other movies we reviewed with better budgets and loftier aims. So, yes, it is a TNA flick. I'm not going to pretend it's not. That's certainly a major component of the film. But it also is telling an interesting variation on the classic Dracula story, which I would never have thought possible going into it, having only read a little bit about it. So, if you have never watched this movie because you thought it was just going to be a barely veiled skin flick without much substance to it, it is a barely veiled thin skin flick, but it does have substance. And so I would say if you haven't watched this one for those reasons, then it might be worth taking a chance on because there's more here than you might initially think. Later.